everybody, Mrs. Kip back again to talk about animals of the freshwater habitat. So, freshwater habitat is anything like a lake, a pond, a stream, and they didn't show us on the globe today where there are freshwater habitats because they are everywhere, all over the world. Freshwater is different than saltwater, different than the ocean. So tomorrow we'll be learning about the saltwater habitat, but today we are learning about freshwater habitats. So here are some pictures of examples of freshwater habitats. And actually where I grew up in Saranac Lake in the Adirondacks, my parents' house is on a pond that's about a mile around. It's a big pond, and that was habitat to fish, turtles, ducks, beavers at one point. The turtles actually that lived in that habitat, that I'm sure still do, there was a tree that fell down in the water on an ice storm when I was really little, and nobody ever took it out of the pond. It just laid there. And whenever it's sunny out, the little snapping turtles would come out and they'll stand on the log and look up at the sun like they're tanning to get some heat from the sun. So that was very cool. So I'm sure we are going to learn all about animals that are similar to the pond that I grew up next to. It's called Moody Pond in Saranac Lake, if you want to look it up. It's beautiful. All right, let's find Rattenborough so he can take us on our trip of the day. Here he is, next to a turtle. That's not the first picture. Where are you, Rattenborough? There, he's fishing. There he is. Hello again. Glad you could join me. I thought that we needed a real change, so I've come off dry land to a place where it's wet all the time. A lake. A lake is an area of water that is surrounded by land. There is a lot of water in the world. In fact, water covers most of the Earth's surface. But only a tiny part of the world's water is fresh water, the kind of water you and I can drink because it has very little salt in it. I like his fishing hat. He looks good. Here we go. This is the picture we just looked at. The examples of the freshwater habitats. Freshwater is found in streams, rivers, lakes, and ponds. The water in these streams, rivers, lakes, and ponds comes from the rain and from melting ice and snow. Isn't it amazing to think that the water from the drinking fountain at school or from the faucets in your house all comes from the rain? That's pretty cool. Well, here are some lilies and lily pads. These were also in the pond where I grew up. I'm here at the water's edge or on the water's side to explore this lake and the plants and animals that call this freshwater habitat home. Freshwater habitats have many kinds of fish, birds, insects, and other animals. Standing here, I can see an enormous or very big leaf in the water. Let me climb onto it so we can get a closer look. This is a water lily leaf. A water lily is a plant that lives in water near the edges of ponds and lakes. Plants are important in freshwater habitats because they make oxygen for animals to breathe. Plants are also food for the animals to eat, and they can provide shelter to protect animals from their predators. The leaves of the water lily are very large, round, and green, and they float on the surface of the water. So if they float on the surface of the water, that means they stay on top of the water. They don't sink. You know who loved the water lilies where I grew up was the frogs were always on the lilies. They become lily pads. Oh, look at, those are just like the turtles I was talking about and the tree that fell in the pond when I was little. They're out there catching some rays too. The water lily is well adapted for living in this habitat. Like the kapok tree in the rainforest, the lily's large leaves let it get as much sunlight as needed for food and energy. Lilies are also food for many animals. Believe it or not, animals like deer, porcupines, beavers, and turtles all eat the leaves, whereas ducks and geese like to eat the roots. Some animals like fish and frogs use the lily leaves as hiding places, and the flowers bring bees and other insects. I'm going to float around the edge of the lake on this water lily leaf, but I'm going to have to leave soon because this pesky turtle will not leave my leaf alone. If you ever touch the bottom of a lily pad, it's super slimy. Pretty but slimy. I've pushed out from the edge of the lake a little, and I already can see another kind of plant that lives here. It's called a cattail, and it gets its name from the unusual way it looks. Thankfully for me, it doesn't have much to do with real cats. Cattails have long, thin stems with foot-long, furry flower spikes at the top that turn from green in the early summer to brown in the fall. The flower spike feels soft and furry and looks a little like a cat's tail, but I think it looks more like a hot dog. The plants can reach up to 9 feet in height, which lets them get as much sunlight as they need. Well, this is what he's talking about, the cattails. And when I was little, we called them hot dogs too. We didn't call them cattails because it looks like a hot dog on a stick. As with water lilies, some animals use cattails for food and shelter. Muskrats and geese like to eat the roots of the cattail, and the juicy green shoots are a favorite of moose and elk. Many kinds of birds make their homes among the cattails. It's very hard to see anything in there because cattails grow so thickly, so it's a good place for birds to build their nests and lay and hatch their eggs. Predators like snakes and frogs also live among the cattails and search for animals like birds and insects for food. I think I'm going to move out now. As you know, I'm not very good with snakes. Uh-oh. These are rainbow trout. These are really, really pretty fish. Come with me beneath the water and let's take a look at what's under there. Here are some nice looking rainbow trout. Fish can only live in water, and they breathe underwater using gills on the sides of their bodies. Gills take in oxygen from the water around them. Fish have strong tails that they use for swimming and fins that they use for steering and balance. The rainbow trout is a carnivore. He is a meat eater. It eats other water animals like insects, other fish, and sometimes shellfish. It even eats some small land animals like mice if it gets the chance, so I'm sure it wouldn't mind a nibble of rat. Rainbow trout like to live in rivers but prefer the deeper water of big lakes. And here's a frog. I enjoyed exploring beneath the surface of the water, and now I'm going to rest on a lily pad again. While I'm drying off a bit, let me show you a kind of frog called a bullfrog that I can see sitting on the water's edge. Frogs are amphibious, which means they live both in water and on land. Bullfrogs are the largest kind of frog found in North America, and they can grow more than a half foot long and weigh more than a pound. That's a really big frog. The bullfrog gets its name from the loud cow-like noise it makes. I bet birds and turtles would be pretty surprised to know that a frog can make such a loud sound. Pretty neat, huh? This bullfrog is resting now, but it will come out to hunt when it gets dark. Bullfrogs eat a lot of different kinds of food. They are carnivores, so they eat small fish, snakes, birds, and insects, like this dragonfly that's buzzing around my head. So, like I said, growing up near a pond at night, in the summer, it would be hot out, have the windows open, and you could hear them out there. Boom, boom. It was really, really loud. There's a dragonfly. Adult dragonflies are flying insects with long bodies and wings. Dragonflies live around lakes, streams, and other freshwater habitats because they lay their eggs in water. Adult dragonflies eat other insects like mosquitoes, flies, and bees. The dragonfly uses its long wings to hover or stay in one place while flying around in the air where it catches its food. It has to be careful because the bullfrog isn't the only one that likes to eat dragonflies. Birds and turtles like to eat them too. There's some ducks. The water is getting a little rough out here. Ah, that's why. Here come some birds that like to eat insects. These are kind of ducks called mallards. Ducks are birds that can live both in and out of water, but it's the water where they spend most of their time. Like all birds, ducks, like these mallards, are covered in feathers. Did you know that ducks' feathers are waterproof? Ducks rub special oil from their tails all over their feathers. Because oil and water don't mix, water drips right off the ducks without getting their feathers wet. Well, that's pretty cool. Ooh, there's a duck's booty up in there. Must be looking for some fish. Ducks float on the surface of the water and have large webbed feet to help them paddle. They dip their heads under the water and use their beaks, which are called bills, to search for food at the bottom of the lake. Mallards eat grasses and seeds from plants and small animals like insects, worms, snails, frogs, and small fish. Well, we've had a good look around this freshwater habitat, but I have to get off this lily leaf before these ducks knock me off. There's another kind of water habitat, and we're going to have a look at it next time. I hope you'll join me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to start my long trip back to shore. All right, tomorrow he's going to take us to a saltwater habitat in the ocean. I'm very excited for that because the ocean's my favorite thing. But before that, we need to go over some questions about freshwater habitats that we just learned about. So if I asked you to describe a freshwater habitat to me, what are some things you would tell me? You could tell me that a freshwater habitat is a river, a stream, a lake, or a pond, water that does not have much salt in it. What are some plants that live in freshwater habitats? What's the plant Rattenborough was just sitting on that he said the duck was about to knock him off of? It was a water lily. Remember the cattails that look like the hot dogs on a stick? Those also live in freshwater habitats. What animals live in freshwater habitats? There's a bunch. We heard about fish, like the rainbow trout, birds like ducks, insects, including dragonflies, bees, mosquitoes, flies, frogs, deer, porcupines, beavers, turtles, the moose. They were all around the freshwater habitat. How are dragonflies adapted to live in a freshwater habitat? How are dragonflies adapted to live in a freshwater habitat? Dragonflies lay their eggs in water. They eat insects that live in freshwater habitats like mosquitoes, flies, and bees. What carnivores did we learn about today that live in freshwater habitats? So if it's a carnivore, it's a meat eater. What carnivores did we learn about today that live in freshwater habitats? We learned that a rainbow trout and bullfrogs are both carnivores that live in freshwater habitats. What is the one omnivore that we learned about today? So an omnivore eats both plant and animals. They like plants and they like meat. We learned about one omnivore today that lives in the freshwater habitat. And that was the mallard ducks. What was the nocturnal animal we learned about that lives in freshwater habitats? Remember, nocturnal means they rest during the day and come out at night. Remember I said in the summer when it was hot out at night, I'd be in bed and I could hear these making noise in the pond? It was the bullfrog. And he didn't sound like he was going ribbit, ribbit. It was like boom, boom, like real deep and loud. All right, the important vocabulary word from today's lesson was the word float. In the read aloud, you heard the leaves of the water lily are very large, round, and green, and they float on the surface of the water. They stay on top. They don't sink. If things float on water, that means they stay on top of the water and do not sink, like I just said. In the summer, I like to float in the pool. I do not like to sink. I like to float in the water. I am going to say 5 different sentences, and you are going to tell me whether they float or they do not float. I mentioned before in my class, we use sign language to answer in groups. This is yes. This is no. So yes, it floats. No, it does not float. Ready? Number 1. The leaf fell from the tree and landed on the surface of the water. Would that float or not float? The leaf fell from the tree and landed on the surface of the water. That floats. Yes. Number 2. Harry threw the rock and it sank to the bottom of the pond. Did that float or not float? Well, if Harry threw the rock and it sank to the bottom of the pond, that does not float. That sunk. Number 3, the boat rocked gently back and forth on top of the waves. The boat rocked gently back and forth on top of the waves. Yes, that floats. It's on top of the waves. If it was under the waves, it would not float. But on top of the waves, yes. Number 4, the dolphin dove deep down into the ocean. The dolphin dove deep down into the ocean. No, it does not float. If he's deep down underneath, he's not floating on top of the surface. Last one, number 5. There are many pennies under the water at the bottom of the water fountain. There are many pennies under the water at the bottom of the water fountain. No, they do not float. All right, guys, that was fun. Tomorrow, we will learn about animals of the saltwater habitat in the ocean. My favorite thing. I'm so excited for that. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.